My name is Siobhan Golden, and I'm the current intern with Mercy Global Action, the justice arm of Mercy International Association. During this interview, we will be highlighting the services provided by McAuley Community Services for Women, who actively support women and children experiencing homelessness and family violence and help to break their cycles of homelessness in Melbourne, Australia. I am joined by Carol Vale, the Head of Strategic Projects at McAuley Community Services for Women, and she previously held the position of Head of Community Services. After 18 years as Executive Director of Bethlehem Community Inc., Carol led the integration of the Bethlehem Community Programme into Sacred Heart Mission's Women's Services, as well as the cultural change process. She has worked in the homeless sector for over 25 years and has vast experience in project management, direct service delivery, networking, and advocacy. Carol was a founding member and convener of Shekinah Homeless Services for over 10 years and has represented the homeless sector on several boards and reference groups, including 10 years on the Council of Catholic Social Services Victoria. Carol has always worked with organisations whose values align with those of McAuley Community Services for Women. She believes her experience and ethos are strongly aligned with the Mercy ethos, which is lived out by supporting women and their children in a way that contributes to a more equal and just society. So thank you, Carol, for joining me on this call today. It's wonderful to connect with you.
Nice to be here.
So to begin, McAuley House provides a place for rest, recovery, and reconnection for women who have been homeless. What are the most common drivers of women's homelessness that you've come across in your ministry?
Thanks, Siobhan. As you're aware, we have 2 residential programs where we, in our homeless services stream, as well as our family violence stream, where women come directly from an incident of family violence. In our homeless McAuley House in Ballarat and in Melbourne, we saw 59 women, I think, over the last 12 months, who have the main drivers always is family violence, and that's right across both our services. So 55% of women presenting to homeless services have experienced family violence, if not immediately, then certainly it's been part of their transition into homelessness. We're able to give the women up to 2 years where they can rest, recover, and rebuild their skills. So the main drivers are still family violence, lack of affordable housing, which is becoming a huge issue, particularly in Australia at the moment, mental health, which we have mental health services that all of our services we wrap around the women, gap in wealth accumulation, which is becoming a large, very big issue again in Australia, women leaving work early, no superannuation, casual, low-paid workforce, which we have a McAuley Works program that encourages the women to we work with the women case management to get back into employment because that is the key driver out of homelessness and family violence. But they would be the main drivers.
So you have mentioned domestic violence as a main driver. So just to lean on that for another question, the COVID-19 pandemic and movement restrictions are putting women and children at a greater risk to experiences of family violence. Has McAuley Community Services for Women taken any specific steps or actions to address this increased risk of violence faced by women and children?
Our referrals specifically for family violence come through the Victorian State Referral Body, and very early on when COVID started, they were aware, as we were, that the numbers were extremely low, which was really troubling. So it took some time to realise that because everyone was particularly in Victoria, lockdown, we were locked down for a long time, and often women were unable to access the services because they were actually in the same household as the perpetrator. since then, the numbers have increased. During that time, what McAuley did was we stopped the movement as much as we could of women in agreement with our referring body, which is Safe Steps, so that to decrease not only the stress for the women, but the likelihood of infection of COVID. We were asked by the government to keep a couple of places free, vacant, for women that needed to immediately come from a family violence situation if they did have COVID. And our staff went to extraordinary lengths and did an amazing job of setting up connections for those women who were isolated, not only in their homes, but in our existing refuges that we have as part of the McAuley program. So that was Zoom links to virtual tours and workshops and all sorts of lots of fun things, to movie nights that they ran out of our hub and spoke model, which is the main model of our service delivery at McAuley.
People experiencing homelessness often face discrimination and exclusion as a result of their housing status. What impact does stigma and social isolation have on the well-being of individuals and families who are living in conditions of homelessness?
I think one of the key factors is mental health. We've always talked through my vast experience. I'm old now. What we've found is early days we talked about mental health being the cause of homelessness. I think there's lots of evidence now to where we realise that it can be a bit in an egg, that the loss of housing, loss of affordable housing has a huge impact on people's mental health and could be a single causal element of their mental health, a mental illness. So it also includes a psychological stress, physical and sexual abuse, because women are placed in substandard accommodation, shared rooming houses. They're far more vulnerable, more drug and alcohol issues as a result of that, hunger and food hardships, and lower and less stable employment. So there are all, one of the things that we don't talk about often, and that is, and the literature doesn't either, is lack of confidence. And that is something that McAuley is very, very good, is core to our community focus and the wraparound services, where we can give the women up to 2 years to stop, take a breath. We have a hub and spoke model where women come into programs. We have over 20 monthly programs at the moment under our Skills for Life program. And a lot of that is around just building the women's confidence in being able to go back to even like cooking a meal for their children, because over the years they have lost a lot of skill because they haven't had the opportunity to use them. So I think that's a key factor that we often don't talk about. Like just an anecdotal story, if I'm being indulgent here, there was a woman many years ago who had severe mental health issues, and her boys were estranged. And understandably, they had been through, living with a parent with a mental health issue, particularly that's not being treated, can be, awful for them. So she came into McAuley House program, was able to, most women say, I can rest. They come into our program exhausted because they're constantly changing. Their time runs out in a transitional property after 3 months. So her focus was, I just want to be able to cook them a meal. She had lost those skills, hadn't done that for years. She worked with staff, managed to cook relearned how to cook a sensational spaghetti bolognese. And those boys came into our program. They were adult boys then, older teenagers who didn't really want anything to do with her. But that was the key for her to reunite with those 2 boys. And that was a really good scenario. So it was something as simple as reviving her confidence and say, you can actually do this. So that is certainly a focus of our the McAuley model.
Thank you for sharing that story. As part of your role working on the front line of homeless services, you've engaged with women and children experiencing homelessness on a daily basis. How does the expertise and perspectives of those with lived experience guide your programme development and the services provided by McAuley House to support women and children to exit homelessness?
Hearing directly from the women and children with lived experience, I'm not so much on the front line, so I need to clarify that in case any of my staff go, you're not anywhere near them. It's a cornerstone of the advocacy efforts for McAuley to influence government and service improvement. So we're very, the last few years in particular, we have spent a lot of time looking at different ways to hear the voices of the women and children, which is vital, we think, for not only service improvement, but for the women themselves to be heard, and for our advocacy with government, as well as through our newsletters, social media, so forth. So some of the stories are informal. We might get them through case managers. The trust has to be built. It's an interesting place to sit. We have really experienced staff, the staff member, Kerry, who forms relationships with the women through our community lunches. So once that trust is there, then we're more able to capture the voices of the women. We've had 4 significant submissions in Victoria in the last few years, the submission to family violence, mental health, and in each of those 4 government submissions, we have been very mindful of making sure that the women's voices and children's are included in those those submissions. So and of course, we're very mindful of, at the end of it all, whose story is it? I think that's a question that we constantly need to ask. Of course, we look at the ethical issues around that. The women always get to see the story, and they have absolutely nothing is put forward anywhere without them saying, no, change my mind, don't want to do that, don't want it to go, or that's not what I said and it needs to be changed. So we're, it's crucial to our service delivery.
That's very important to hear. And also Mercy Global Action, in our advocacy and homelessness, we always say that those with lived experience are the true experts. It's wonderful to hear how you include those voices and how much importance you're giving the voices of the women and the families.
We had a situation with our refuges, because McAuley, I think, is the only, to be honest, only organisation that will accept older boys into our refuges. Some of them are still on a model of, not over 12 years old, whatever. We'll take them up to 18 years of age, if mum, or even older, if mum is the main carer, if it's just the 2 of them. But what we found, despite all the best efforts, they just weren't coming in to, understandably, we were thinking, oh, well, that's a hard gig, they're away from their friends and the rest of it. But at the end of the day, when we asked them, they said, you don't have the internet on in those refuges. So it was as basic as, oh my God, we need to look at, that was in a refuge situation. So sometimes it's the really simple things that can make a significant difference to, delivering a service.
So finally, if given the opportunity, Carol, what message would you like to give the United Nations in regard to women's homelessness and family homelessness?
Well, this is difficult because we haven't got time. Look, I think the main message is that I think for all governments, and we would like the UN, which obviously not new, that homelessness can be eradicated. But what it's going to take is a reminder to governments that it needs to be put into our normal conventions. It needs to be legislated, not left to the whim, particularly in Australia. We would love pressure to be put on the Australian government, not left to the whim of each government as it changes over. We might look at homelessness, we might not. Australia's just missed a massive opportunity to not put any social housing government in our stimulus packages post-COVID. It's economically smart. If you spend $1, the government, $1.50 goes back into the economy. So from a UN perspective, that look at the modelling to encourage governments to legislate, and it could be in Australia, it could be as simple as for every 100 places, apartment blocks that are built, that 20% of them must go and must be funded by government to go towards affordable housing. In Australia, the issue is not just housing, it's affordability. And our safety net, we're the, I think, second or third highest country in the world with the highest living standards, the cost of living. We're 35th out of 36 for our safety net. And we are pushing people quite deliberately at the moment, it's about to happen in 2 weeks, post-COVID, back into poverty. They're being asked to live below the poverty line so that the safety nets aren't there. So it would be similar to I think the Council of Europe task force looked at, they made a recommendation that one place per 10,000 people in the population should be put aside for women escaping family violence. That's a good example. And that's if the UN can put forward modelling like that and pressure governments to have a good look at that, because there are models out there. But the key to it is it can be eradicated. But it needs goodwill and it needs a dose of compassion as well, I would suggest. But not impossible.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Carol. And we will continue our advocacy for these models, end homelessness, and that it can be eradicated. So thank you so much for the work that you and everyone at McAuley Community Services for Women continue to do to help women and children and families to exit family violence situations and end homelessness. And thank you so much for joining me on this call today. It's been great.
Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Siobhan, and thank you all for the work that you do through Mercy Global International. Thank you.